If you are a parent raising a preteen or a teen, this is for you. If you find yourself getting frustrated, yelling, things like screen time, confidence, motivation, you're really curious on what's going on with your children's behavior, and you just haven't yet found a way to find practical tips and strategies on how to support them on a daily basis. You might be feeling the pressure, the cultural pressure that you need to do something to change this behavior. For the last 14 years, I've been educating parents on understanding emotional behavior. And this course is packed with practical tips and strategies on how to understand your children's behavior now, how to create the connection that you desire in your relationship, how to parent your way, maybe not even the way that your partner parents, how to feel aligned and confident, and really support your children with their big emotions like anger and anxiety and overwhelm. So inside this mini course, what I've decided to do is go right to those things that I have noticed parents see biggest transformation quickest. So if you're willing to commit 10 minutes a day, 20 minutes a day on seeing and understanding your children's behavior on a deeper level, head on over to heatherchauvin.com/parenting. All right, it's that time of year, and I have been spending some precious time doing a reflection on my year. And I always find it interesting how in January, we're so optimistic and excited and typically of like, oh, I'm going to crush this year. And then the year happens, life happens, and we get to December and we're like, oh my gosh, that, you're either super proud of yourself or you've had an incredibly difficult year. A lot of grief, sadness, hope, possibility. It's an emotional roller coaster. But what I find fascinating is year after year, how we sometimes lie to ourselves and convince ourselves that, this year is my year. But yet we don't strategically strategize or have a plan or have the right support around us. And if you don't create a plan, then you plan to fail. And I walk that line pretty clear, consistently, that I love a good plan and a good strategy, but I don't actually take it that serious. That's not the way that my brain thinks. I am all about feelings. I'm all about desires. I love art and creativity. And the older I get and the more I do this personal development work, I understand the benefits of planning and strategy, but I don't put my purpose into it. I don't put my identity, my value, my worth into strategy. And if anything, I actually have a difficult time implementing, which some of you may find surprising. So there were three things, 3 to 4 things that I was reflecting on that have been a game changer or awareness or lessons learned from 2022. And I wanted to share them with you. The theme of the year was being emotionally uncomfortable and really leaning into the challenges, the emotional challenges. It was a year of next level identity. I would say this is probably one of the most, I don't want to say difficult years because that's not necessarily true, but I definitely went into this emotionally uncomfortable pain cave, if you would call it that. And I'm going to explain to you, and some of you who've been listening to me consistently would understand what I'm talking about because you've heard other episodes and things like that. But at the beginning of the year, I actually decided, it's been almost a year, I decided to change the name of the podcast it was around this time actually, from Mom is in Control to Emotionally Uncomfortable. And I've been getting really good feedback about the change. And some people have been listening to me forever and said, I actually more identify with Emotionally Uncomfortable than Mom is in Control. Mom is in Control is, to me, a very masculine title. It is very like controlling, hence the reason the title. And it's very centered around motherhood. And at the beginning of the year, when I was transitioning my identity from raising a child who is going out into the world as an adult, I could see that identity shift happening within me of like, who am I beyond motherhood? And I've been asking myself that for years. This is not new to me. But so much of what I built my business on was mothering and motherhood and parenting. And if you are a woman listening to this, raising children, you know how that becomes such a huge part of your identity, and how, cultural expectations and, living and breathing. But at the same time, what I've been teaching you is, what do you want beyond that? Because fulfillment isn't found in other people. Fulfillment is not going to be solely found in parenting, because you cannot control your children's behavior. You can co-create, but parenting is a relationship. It is not you controlling somebody else. And that goes the same for partnerships and marriages. You cannot control your partner's behavior. Like, you will not be able to do that. You can inspire and motivate, but you cannot do the work for other people when they're not willing to do the work. And people grow at their own pace. We can influence, but that's about it. So Emotionally Uncomfortable was a concoction of that. I could feel this deep, deep, deep grief, like this identity grief of like, that part of my life is done. Although I still have 2 other children, every time you go through something the first time, you're like, oh crap, this is going to happen again and again with every child as they go through this phase. It's like when your child go to kindergarten or school for the first time, like there's a grieving process, like my baby is gone. So that was emotionally uncomfortable. And I wanted to drop the mom title because so much of what I teach women is beyond mothering. It's whether you want to advance your career and you want to make more money, or whether you want to feel more fulfilled, or it just depends on what your thing is. And lastly, another reason why I changed the theme of the podcast, and this will go hand in hand with the lessons that I've learned, is I have realized over the past 12 months and beyond that, it is incredibly emotionally uncomfortable to become the person that you want to become. And not everybody is willing to do that work. A lot of people say that they want change. And this has been, I would say, one of the biggest lessons in my year. And this goes for my children and family as well. Just because someone says they want something doesn't mean they actually want it. Because your actions need to align with your values and your desires and your vision. And when they don't, you are living out of integrity with yourself. And when you're living out of integrity, you're out of alignment. And that's where the disconnect and the anger and resentment and disease start to develop in your life. A quick shout out to today's sponsor, AG1. If you've been a listener to the show, you know I don't promote anything that I don't personally use or believe in. I started using AG1 about a year ago, and it's now become a daily habit. I add 1 scoop to my morning glass of water. And what I love most about this is, without asking, my husband and 3 boys have started implementing this into their morning routine as well. Within every scoop, you are absorbing 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole foods, probiotics, and adaptogens to start your day right. This helps with recovery, focus, and aging. It's cheaper than buying all the supplements that eventually collect dust in your cupboard. Head on over to athleticgreens.com/EU to get your free gift on your first purchase. It's a free 1-year supply of immune boosting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. That's athleticgreens.com/EU for emotionally uncomfortable. Athletic Greens, ATHLETIC greens.com/EU. Now let's get back to the podcast. So, number one, so that's kind of why I changed emotionally uncomfortable, is because it was a new era for me, but it was also, putting a stake in the ground that, I'm here to serve people who actually want to get emotionally uncomfortable, not people who are looking for a quick fix. And, there's deep, 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 deep healing that is required in order to get to that place. So my first lesson, that's like an overarching theme of lessons, but the first thing that really rocked my world is raising a teenager in 2022. And I want to give huge props because my son is an amazing soul having a beautiful human experience. And this child this year has taught me, he's held amazing boundaries with me. Going from this mother, this woman who is trying to lead this child into adulthood, and his boundaries of like, I'm going to figure it out my way, and you are not going to control my destiny. And part of that is I wrote down deep compassion. And I want you to hear me when I say this. What he has taught me this year is walking this line. Like, he's brought me to my knees many, many times, but walking this line between having deep, deep, deep compassion for another human being. And this is what I teach inside of my Understanding Your Child's Behavior mini course. You can go to heatherchauvin.com/parenting. But this is like developing that deep sense of compassion and really seeing our children. That's a skill, that's a practice, and it's wildly emotionally uncomfortable. And then on the other side of that is knowing when to hold that boundary, right? Knowing when you're not being emotionally manipulated by your child and being like, okay, this is the natural consequence. But putting yourself in your child's shoes just for a moment and being like, wow, I would not want to be in your brain. And you got a lot on your plate. And in order to do that, you have to be able to sort out your inner shit and really see what is mine and what is theirs. And can I just have deep compassion for this human in front of me right now? And then it's deciding where you want to have boundaries and implementing those boundaries and holding those boundaries. That has been a challenge this year. And looking back 12 months, I can say that has been a mental marathon that I ran. And I'm sure it's not over, but I'm a better person because of that challenge. It has helped me in so many ways, both personally and professionally, and with people. Which brings me to my other point. Boundaries, guilt, and people pleasing. And the second lesson that I would say that I'd like to reflect on is the desire to really embody who I am. So when I look back on my childhood, I realize that I'm an introvert. And it's not, I used to judge myself all the time that I didn't like socializing. I don't like socializing. I don't do it a lot. Although people have their opinions. Actually, it's funny because a lot of my colleagues who have presence or they're speakers on stage are wildly introverted, and they get exhausted by human energy quickly. And a lot of people would assume that they're extroverted, but they're actually introverted. And I'm very similar. What lights me up is intellectual conversation, soul-based conversation. I want to know about like who you really are and who you want to be. I don't want to talk about the weather. I don't want to gossip about people. Like I can physically feel energy leaving my body when I'm doing that. But it's like, let's talk about your fears. Let's talk about guilt. Let's talk about your desires. Let's talk about how uncomfortable something is for you. Let's talk about grief. Let's talk about sadness. Let's talk about the hard work, the emotionally uncomfortable work that you're doing to become a better person that nobody is observing behind closed doors, right? Because they can't see it on the internet. And this year, and it's probably because of my challenges in parenting this year, I have really said no to a lot of people pleasing. And I wouldn't identify as a people pleaser. But what I mean by that is I always think when someone asks me to do something, and sometimes I feel I really want to say yes. Okay. It's not that I don't want to do something. It's, am I doing this out of obligation? And I really encourage you to write that down. Am I doing this out of obligation? Anytime I'm asked to do anything, I always ask myself, am I doing this out of obligation? And if the answer is yes, then I don't do it. So it could be anything, absolutely anything. And it's just a simple no, thank you. Thank you for thinking of me. I don't have the capacity. I try not to lie to people because I don't think that is right either. And if someone's persistent, I just repeat myself. And I'm at a stage in my life where I really value when people do this back to me. Like, I love being in relationships with friends who are not people pleasers. And they're like, thank you so much. It's just not a priority for me right now. I don't have the capacity. Because you know that they have boundaries, and boundaries are freaking beautiful. It is so good to be in relationship with people with boundaries because you know, like, you're like, hey, do you want to do this? No, I actually don't. It's like, cool, no big deal. Rather than being in a relationship with someone that's like, hey, do you want to do this? And they're like, yeah, sure. And you know that they don't want to do it, but they are raging. They're a raging people pleaser. So they said yes. And then they show up and you're like, you don't even want to be here. And then you're like, oh my gosh, now you're sucking the life out of me because you don't have boundaries. So I have just, although this, I still have guilt around it. Let me be clear about that. I still have guilt around my boundaries sometimes, but I understand that guilt is not life enhancing, right? It's just like fear. It's not life enhancing. And I do not want that to dictate my actions. So what I do is I just say, no, thank you. Or I say, I don't have the capacity or whatever I need to say, which helps me focus a little bit more. Now, this brings me to my third lesson of the year. And I think I'm going to be talking more about this in 2023. And I think this is going to be a big one. It's going to be a shocker for you. I've had about a 70 to 80% consistency show up rate in all areas of my life. And my growth has been 10x'd. This theory or this lesson and this year really showed this to me. My business continues to grow. My health continues to improve. My happiness, fulfillment, relationships, all areas of my life are on an uphill trajectory because I show up less. And I don't mean physically show up less. I mean, I do less better, but I really worked on perfection this year and not beating myself up when it's not 100% perfect. So when people say, oh my gosh, I am a perfectionist and I'm all or nothing, I'm like, yeah, and you're going to burn out and you're going to stop and you're going to sabotage yourself. Nobody can show up 100% of the time. Nobody. It's physically impossible. So this year I was like, I'm going to show up like 70, 75, 80%. And then the other 25%, I'll just do whatever the fuck I want. And when I gave myself permission to do that, life felt so much easier. Like everything felt so much easier. So let me give you an example. Again, every time I'm working with somebody, whether it's personally or professionally, you're in my mastery program, mastery business program, it doesn't matter. I always say you need a strategy, but it's how you work the strategy, right? I'll teach you strategy, but it's all your resistance and emotional shit, your shadows, the stories you're telling yourself, everything that is going to make you successful or not. That's going to get you to your desired outcome or not. And consistently this year, I was like, I'll show up 80%. But when I showed up 80%, I welcomed in all of my demons. I welcomed in all of my shadows. I welcomed in all of my resistance. And I was like, bring it. Let's run towards the fire. Let's do this. So, example, running a marathon. So in January, I decided to run a full marathon, not a half marathon, a full marathon, and I signed up for it. And this is a real story. So notice I committed to a full marathon, but my actual focus was the training, not the goal. The goal was the full marathon, but my focus was the training. I actually signed up for the marathon, not with the outcome in mind, not with like the time that I wanted to do. My goal was just to cross the finish line. I didn't care if it took me 12 hours. Okay. I don't identify as a runner. I do not identify as a quick runner. If you talk to all my friends, they would say Heather is the least likely person to ever run a marathon in her life. I'm not built like a runner. Okay. But I commit to the training. So I did what I needed to do, what was required of me, right? I ran towards my resistance. I ran towards my demons. I asked myself, what did I need? And I was like, I need support. So I hired support. I hired nutritional support. I hired PT. I did massage consistently. And I also got a running buddy. Now, I would say I showed up. I did all of that about 70 to 80%, meaning I did it consistently, but I didn't do it perfectly. I didn't complete all the runs that I was supposed to complete. I followed through with the massage, but I didn't do all of my, PT or I didn't roll out and stretch every single day. But I showed up. About 70%. And the imperfection in me, like the parts of me that I didn't do it perfectly, any guilt or self-abuse that comes up of you suck, you didn't do this perfectly, or the parts that were really, really hard on ourselves. I was like, yeah, but I'm showing up way better than the person that's not even willing to sign up. And I kind of just let myself off the hook because that was my goal going into it. So here's the kicker. October-ish. No, September. Before I ran, no, it was after I ran the race. I was gone away for a weekend with some friends from high school. And these friends are more athletic than I am. They're like, Heather, how the hell did you do that? And two of them were like, I want to run the race next year. And I said, great, let's go for it. I'm not going to do it. I think you should. January 1st, you can sign up for it. And one of them looked at me and said, I didn't think you were allowed to walk at all during a race. And I told her, I said, are you kidding me? There's 90-year-old people who walk the whole thing. She goes, oh my gosh, I just never thought you could stop while you're running. And this is someone who identifies as a runner, and she runs 10K for shits and giggles on the daily. And the story she was telling herself was like, if I can't do it perfectly, then I'm not going to do it. But who do you think has already ran a full marathon? And who do you think hasn't? The person who is a perfectionist about it, or the person who's willing to have courage and sign up and show up? Another thing that I want to mention is, and those people, by the way, probably will not sign up for the race next year because perfection is going to get in the way. And they're going to wake up one day and be like, you know what? I wish I did that when I was younger. In conversation after conversation throughout the year, I've been talking to women and men, and I'm like, why won't you actually do that thing? And they're like, because I'm afraid to fail. And I'm like, are you afraid to fail, or are you afraid to try? And the fear of trying actually is because they don't like doing things that they suck at. They don't like feeling uncomfortable feelings. So this year, as you know, the theme was being emotionally uncomfortable. Is I was just willing to get emotionally uncomfortable. I was willing to sit in my shit. I was willing to show up and say, I might fail, but like, it's a race. Who cares? And so many other things that I tried in my business, in my relationships, with my health. And anytime abuse came my way, or toxic like behavior or coaching, anyone that approached me without compassion, even though, yes, we all need a good ass kicking every now and again, but if there was no sprinkled compassion, I was just not here for it. We're allowed to make mistakes. But the fact that I see so many people talking about economy, so many people living in a state of fear, so many people crazy, terrified of their children's behavior and not knowing what to do, are coming from a place of perfection. And over and over and over and over and over again, it is very apparent to me that if you are not willing to feel the full rainbow of your emotions, the ones that we have labeled as good and the ones that we have labeled as bad, if you have low emotional intelligence, you will never feel fulfilled. You will never feel content. You will chronically be chasing a new job, a new relationship, the next, tool, the next strategy, the next fill in the blank. The work is in the emotionally uncomfortable, messy middle, where you're holding yourself accountable. You're asking for what you need. And the last thing that I have really discovered this year was that an identity shift takes time. An identity shift takes time. And what I mean by that is, who do you need to become in order to live the life that you want to live? To identify as a wealthy person, to identify as a successful business owner, to identify as a woman raising children who feels confidence in understanding what her kids' behavior is saying, to identify as a leader who knows how to coach people instead of doing the work for them. You need to chronically show up and do way more work and effort consistently than you probably give yourself permission. And being on the other side of small identity shifts, I'm like, holy crap, I wildly underestimated the amount of time it takes, but not just time, doing the work consistently over time to have that identity shift. So Being emotionally uncomfortable is where the magic happens. Developing deep compassion, saying no thank you to shit that does not bring you joy or that you feel obligated to do, showing up 75 to 80%, and identity shifts take time. All the lessons, the high-level lessons that I have learned in 2022. And I would love to hear from you and what you have learned this year. Head on over to Instagram at Heather Chauvin, Chauvin, and send me a DM. I love to hear from the listeners, and it's really me who answers my DMs on Instagram. What has been your number one learning of 2022? Are you ready to take back control of your time and energy? But the thought of where to start feels overwhelming. I created something for you. It's called the Energy Finder Quiz. Yep. This quiz takes less than 2 minutes and it helps you identify where to focus so you can conquer your dreams without feeling like you're failing as a mother. After coaching hundreds of women, helping them reverse engineer how they want to feel in their personal and professional lives, I started to notice 4 hidden skills that women must master in order to create the work-life balance that they crave. So head on over to Heather Chauvin, ChauvIN.com/life quiz. heatherchauvin.com/life, LIFE quiz, QUIZ, and get started. I even give you specific podcast episodes to listen to based on your Energy Finder quiz results. The goal is to show you where to focus so you can regain your time and energy and become the woman you deeply know you are capable of becoming. heatherchauvin.com/life quiz.